May, you're a expert on education around the world, and we know what a big impact that has on girls and boys. And we're here at the Salzburg Global Seminar to talk about breaking the glass ceiling. In what proportion of the world, where is education a problem for girls? Where does it damage the aspiration of girls?
Okay. Education has made a lot of progress, and girls' education has made a lot of progress. However, we still have many countries in the world where there is a huge gap between the girls and the boys. Girls lag behind. And these countries are mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, some countries of Asia, such as Pakistan and Afghanistan and others, and some countries of the Middle East, such as Yemen and others. So,
and when you say they lag behind, does that mean they lag behind in the quality of the schooling or in the number of years they go to school?
Both.
Both,
absolutely both. First, let's take the numbers. There are less girls in primary school than boys, by far less girls in secondary schools than boys. But then the quality of education impacts girls more negatively than boys, if quality doesn't exist. The lack of quality.
And tell us about textbooks and the portrayal of girls.
Now, that's a big issue, and you put your finger on one of the major problems of the systems of education and the quality of education is textbooks. Often, textbooks portray girls as passive, as subservient, as obedient, never in leadership roles, never in roles where they are proactive, and that limits their aspirations. As a matter of fact, it damages their aspirations. Mm-hmm. While boys are portrayed exactly the opposite. They're proactive, they're leaders, they're never passive, they're never subservient, and they portray them in leadership roles.
So what is the remedy for that? What would you suggest that should happen?
To really change the curricula and to make it more gender sensitive, and to let the ministries of education recognize if they want a new generation of young men and young women who have aspirations to enter the labor force and the labor market, they need to portray those young girls and young boys in those images.
And as you work in the countries that you've mentioned, in the sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East and Asia, are you getting cooperation from the ministries of education, or is there resistance?
I would say both. There is a lot of cooperation from some ministries, but also there is some resistance. And sometimes in the same ministry of education in a certain country, you have some directors that are willing to work with you and others that do some passive resistance. Never overtly, but some passive resistance.
Tell me about, I think some people might think that same-sex schools are the answer. Tell us what your experience with that has been.
This is a big issue, and many believe that that is the answer. However, it is not always the case. As I usually say, the jury is out on same-sex schools. It has its positive aspects, but it has some negative impact. The positive, very quickly, girls have less competition with boys, and they end up having some leadership roles in same-sex schools, in girls-only schools.
And that's very good.
And that's very good. However, the negative aspect, those leadership positions in a school that's only for girls, once they get out in the bigger world, do not translate into leadership positions in the community or in the society or in the country where they are, because they face the reality of men and women, which they were not used to. But more importantly, another, I would say, a very important negative aspect of the same-sex schools is that in many countries, the girls' schools, only girls, end up getting less resources, less training for the teachers, less textbooks, less infrastructure. We don't build the science labs for the girls' schools, we build it for the boys' schools, and they end up being second-class schools.
So you really see the need to reform the entire system in most countries?
Totally.
Is there a country that you can hold up as a model that is really trying to address this issue?
Several in the Asian Tigers, Singapore and South Korea. One or two in the Middle East. Jordan is making a lot of progress. One or two in Africa that are making progress, Ghana and Uganda.
And what have they done? Just give us one example of what Ghana...
What I talked about, looked at the whole system as a whole,
yes,
and decided to reform it as a system, not do piecemeal work.
Yes, yes.
Looked at the curriculum, looked at teacher training, look at policy issues regarding girls' education. The policy issues used to say, any girl who falls pregnant, she's kicked out of school and cannot come back to school. And in many countries, specifically some sub-Saharan African countries, girls can be pregnant at the age of 13 or 14 because of other students, teachers, somebody in the
tradition
community. Tradition too. So if we stop the girl from going to her school at the age of 13, that's not useful to anybody, neither the girl nor her future family. So the policy now is changing by saying, no, after she gives birth to the child, she can come back to school.
Yes. And that makes for better educated children as well,
Yes,
when you have
exactly.
a better educated mother.
Absolutely.
Now, I can't let you go without asking about the media's role in this, because I know that men are still the dominant people that are being covered by the media in many, many countries. So let's talk a little bit about
Yes. As I usually say, and my studies have proven that when there is a traditional educational system that is portraying the girls and the women in very traditional, stereotyped ways, and you couple that with the media that's doing the same, when the media reinforces those messages that the traditional education systems are doing, then it becomes very hard for women to break that cycle, that vicious cycle of how do I move forward. When media portrays women again in submissive roles or doesn't portray them whatsoever, I did an exercise in Malawi and we looked at the daily paper and we looked at how many times it mentions men and how it portrays men and how many times it mentions women and portrays women. And the result was 92% of the time it's mentioning men.
Yes.
And only 8% of the time it's mentioning women. And whenever it mentions men, they're in leadership positions and executive positions, and the women are farmers and housewives and teachers. That's all.
So they don't show the options that women should have.
Exactly.
They're limiting their options.
Exactly. And that's very powerful in a negative way, because it reinforces the message, the very traditional message, the stereotype message that some traditional education systems were giving.
This is a huge problem that isn't going to be solved overnight. What, if anything, can individuals do to try to help this?
First, as parents, individuals can form parent-teacher organizations and talk to the school, the teachers and the principals. Second, as responsible citizens, they can form organizations and talk to the Ministry of Education. And I do believe the schools in particular, but also the ministry, would listen if there is enough parents and citizens coming and knocking at their door and saying, we want change.
Thank you very much. This is really very interesting.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay.
My pleasure.